Once again, for the second time this week, Steve Bannon failed to delay his criminal trial for contempt of Congress. The judge rejected Bannon's argument that there was too much pretrial publicity, and the trial will go forward on Monday as planned. It's happening just as we are learning more about exactly what Bannon might have known regarding Trump's plans to stay in power. Mother Jones obtained leaked audio of Bannon sharing what he knew with a group of associates just days before the 2020 election.
The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
Quote, "That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself winner." That's what Steve Bannon said Trump was going to do, and it's exactly what Donald Trump did just days later. Dan Friedman is the Mother Jones reporter who revealed that audio, and he joins me now. Dan, give us some context around this. Where was this audio recorded? Do you know why it was recorded?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was recorded in the War Room offices in Washington, D.C., and Bannon was talking to a group of associates of Miles Guo, or Guo Wenguai, who's a Chinese mogul exile who's living in Manhattan in a huge apartment, and who Steve Bannon has worked for. And these people specifically are affiliated with something called GTV, or it's a former company, GTV News, that Guo runs and Bannon has worked with, and they were sort of planning how they were going to cover election night. That's like a Chinese language far-right site. And the person who gave it to me, obviously I can't say very much about that, but there are a lot of people who are both unhappy with some of the people involved in sort of Guo and Bannon circles, but also who have a lot of regret about January 6th and other activities that they were involved in.
Dan, you write that Bannon predicted widespread political violence. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, one thing he said was he had this idea that Antifa was going to have like tens of thousands of people in Washington on election day. That's obviously didn't happen. That was wrong. But more generally, he said, this is going to cause, he said, when Trump falsely declares victory, if Biden's winning and Trump says, as they had a plan to do, when Trump says, I won, even though he was actually losing, that's going to cause a firestorm. The left's going to be very upset. And what he was saying is that this is going to lead to political violence. And he seemed to be suggesting that political violence would make it easier for Trump, this agent of chaos, to pursue his goal of contesting an election result that went against him and ultimately getting somehow this question before the House of Representatives, where he could be declared the president despite having lost the election.
Agent of chaos, indeed. Trump famously fired his FBI director, James Comey, in his first months in office. On the audio, you have Bannon predicting that Trump would fire another FBI director. Let's take a listen.
Here's the thing. After then, Trump never has to go to a voter again. He's going to fire Wray, the FBI director. He's going to say, F you. How about that? Because he's never going to, he's done his last election. Oh, he's going to be off the chain. He's going to be crazy.
I don't know what's more disturbing, the actual audio or the laughter is in the audio. Who else did Bannon list as being on Trump's chopping block? Does he say why?
He said the defense secretary, Esper, was going to be fired. That was correct. He said that Anthony Fauci was going to be fired. Anthony Fauci was not fired. He said that Alex Azar, the HHS secretary, would be among them, and Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA, would be fired. And you know what is striking about that is he is predicting that because Trump will not have to face voters again, he will be freed to do whatever he wants and not have to be responsive to Democratic pressures. Steve Bannon and Trump have, described themselves as these great populists, these advocates of democracy. And here Bannon is expressing contempt and mockery for, the idea that voters have a say in how the government's going to be run.
Here's the thing, Dan. In a normal political environment, audio like this would be absolutely devastating and damning. What was Bannon's response to this audio being published?
Bannon's response was that I already said this in public, so no story here. This isn't news, which is extraordinary because what he's not saying is anything exculpatory. He's not saying I didn't do it. He's not saying this isn't significant. He's just saying, well, I already said this, so why are you writing an article about it? So I think that's quite striking. Our article says that he had acknowledged that Donald Trump had a plan to lie about the election results so that he could get Americans, and particularly his supporters, to believe that he had won when he had in fact lost, so that he could use that as a political tool to challenge the election results and to do what he ultimately did or almost did, which is get Congress to try to install him as president despite having lost. So, he isn't denying that at all. He in fact confirms that he advocated that.